Professor Nirmal Ranjith Dewasiri. Good evening, sir. Thank you for coming for the second time within the same day to have a conversation with me in English. And the topic that we discussed in the morning, which I found a very interesting and a very enlightening conversation to me, was where I questioned you and asked you about the link between youth unrest and the English language, the link that exists in Sri Lanka, because I don't think that's a common thing everywhere else in the world. But from all my reading, I have seen that there is a link here, which is not very heartening. And today I want you to speak about that and to base what you say in your own experiences, because I think you also would have had very close contact with what I'm talking about. Yeah. And you can take the order in any way you like. So you can either start about talking about how language matters in youth unrest or how it mattered, because we mustn't forget that time has passed quite a lot. Yeah. And then you can locate your story in any place you like. And with that question, I leave it up to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Madhu, and thank you. I was very exciting, and I was really looking forward to this because, you know, in the morning, so we were talking about my own the process of, you know, my own the learning of English and the problem that I was facing, and, you know, some aspects of my English.
And I noticed how as an English teacher, this is something I see all the time. Even if your English is pretty good, if you have learned it the difficult way, you think it's not good enough. And if it can happen to you at professor level, sir, and if it can happen to you who write in English, imagine what students feel.
Yes, so that's exactly the case.
Yes.
And now, well, you know, you never reach that level of confidence when you are, you know, particularly speaking a language that you learn in the way that I have, for example, because I think I have the experience of learning two languages. That is, I mean, that is a sort of privilege, because so I at adult age, I started learning Dutch language at the age of around 36 or so, 37, 36, 37. No, actually, that's where I found that, you know, how difficult learning language has been. And actually, the learning language.
The Dutch language I don't think you can compare it with learning English, because Dutch isn't here at all.
No. Yeah. That's exactly what I want to say.
Yes.
I mean, the learning English is a totally, you know, it's a different cup of tea, because, you know, in a way, we have been growing with English, and, you know, we see things, and, you know, and that's English has always been a part of our life.
Yes, like for example, sir, I did French for my A-levels. I got an A. That must be the only A I got. I cannot write or say or speak a single word. So that's a completely different thing. But English is something we see whether we like it or not. It's part of our life.
Yes. No, it's also because, you know, it's depend on what are you going to do with the language, right? So, and also when you are trying to express your feelings, your deeper emotions, and it is, I mean, for example, I learned language, the Dutch language, for a very limited purpose, right? So that was to, you know, use my historical sources, so that's a sort of different thing. But, you know, but English, so we are using for a different purpose. And I mean, writing a dissertation is one thing, but, you know, using it for day-to-day conversation, particularly, you know, to ask a question that the question that you ask me, I mean, you have to immediately respond to it. right? So you have to express, the certain feelings that is very even so difficult to express in your own, mother tongue as well. I mean, there are a lot of nuance area and a lot of blurred area, and so that there's a lot of complications. I mean, although these are my personal feeling, that is very much part of the issue that we are talking about.
I think it's very common, sir. I can imagine it to be very easy as well. Yes.
So I think that is exactly the why most people are reluctant to speak in English and express themselves in English. That's well. So then I'll come back to the topic. The youth unrest, and as I mentioned in the morning, I would prefer the term discontent, right? Well, from 1960s onwards, I would say till the end of 1980s. So that is till the end of the second the youth insurrection in the South. Because I'm focusing on South for a very special reason, because Sri Lanka, in my view, so that incidentally as part of one of the themes that I touched upon in the recently concluded the history exhibition also, that Sri Lanka has this bifurcation between the North and South. Right. So historically, and actually even now, so you cannot use the same criteria that you are using to understand the Southern society to understand the Northern society. It's completely different. The social issues and the even culture and everything, economy. Most of the aspects, the very important aspects are different from each other. So therefore, I don't want to go into detail on that, but I would like to emphasize that. So I'm focusing on the southern issue, yes, right? And when you look at the southern, the post-colonial history of the South, right? So you have this the time period from 1960s to the end of 1980s, where you have you can identify this issue that we can call as the youth discontent, the discontent of the youth, and what we generally call as youth unrest, right? Taruna Sahane, whatever. And so there's it is a multifaceted crisis, I would say. Multifaceted in the sense that so there's a political economy. The political economy that it is very much linked to the economic life of the rural people with a peasant economic background, right? So so you have to understand that the major economic activity of the rural people is the peasant agriculture, right? The cultivating in small holding, economic units, right? So the very small paddy cultivating units, and in some areas chainas, and also the small household gardens, right? We call this hena kumbura vatta pitiya, and so that these kind of terms, the very small holdings, right? And I mean, you cannot produce a it hardly reach this I mean, how do you call it, subsistence, the family subsistence level. It hardly generated the surplus, right? So where you can have a good life, you can build a good house, and you can, right? I mean,
So it was
purchase a
basic
vehicle.
survival level.
Yeah, it's only survival level. It hardly go beyond that, right? Even you have to do some other jobs, that you have to do some, coolie work, and you have to, apart from engaging in the peasant agriculture, you have to find other sources of income. So that's a problem. And so that has been the issue for a while. And what happened in 1940s, so there was a population explosion. There was a massive increase of population for various reasons. So you have the various the diseases were prevented, particularly malaria disease was controlled, and and also smallpox, and these kind of diseases were which was counted for large number of deaths, right? And also the health infrastructure is growing, the rural hospitals and so on. So as a result of this, the infant mortality rate went down. Also, the level of, maternal paternity, the mortality, right? And so this created the increase of population. So that when you look at the population curve, you really see the upward growth, right? And because of that, the rural population was growing, and even among the rural poor, and so then, and at the same time, so there was certain transformation in the social level, particularly the education. So you have free education, where even rural poor was capable of accessing the educational facilities, where you can teach your children with the objective of making them capable of going out of villages and finding a good life, good job, and so on, right? So that there's no future. So those days, our expectations were growing. That is one of the aspects of the post-colonial period. And when you get the freedom, and so you know about the world, right? So there are newspapers and various cultures that you watch films, and right? So which create
probably a culture of hope. No, there's a lot of hope.
There's a culture of hope,
yes,
right? And so this new generation grew up with that background, right? So the culturally, socially, and economically, so they feel that the rural economy is not the place for them, right? So there's a need for them to go out of village, and right, I mentioned about this Gamdorin Eliot metaphor,
Surdas Amarsekara's novel, right?
One of
and I think in the Singhal interview also said, so it was also driven by the fact that there was not enough land to be given to all the children that were being born. That there was no choice but to go out.
So that has already been, that land issue has already been identified, and so that's the reason. That's the reason for the establishing the dry zone colonies based on this Galloya scheme and then Mahaweli scheme. But actually, so that is to take the excess population to the less populated areas further away from urban center. So that is completely different from the desire of the young people. Now, what young people decide not to go back to this these forsaken areas, but
it's so interesting, sir, because I have read much about the colonization process within the ethnic framework, and how much the colonization of, like ghettos of other ethnicities, and that this had been a government thing to actually break those conclaves. But in your case, you're giving also another version of it, where it was actually to get people land when they didn't have land.
No, I think that ethnic aspect is only, I think I wouldn't give much, because, that has been highlighted, particularly those who try to understand the root causes of ethnic issue. But that's only part of it. But because, I don't think that that's the sole reason, I mean, so this colonization scheme was thought about much before the ethnic issue became serious thing.
If you remember Akkara Paha, I used to love that.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yes.
No, I think that, the ethnic aspect became prominent, particularly in 1970s and so on, particularly, so that's the time, the politicians talk about, okay, so your past civilization is there, go and there, and then you have to go there and rebuild your Sinhala civilization and so on.
That's a good example of something that you always say, that the present determines history.
Yeah, okay.
Now we look at it just as an aside, that's an exact thing where now we look at it in a ethnic fashion, where at that time it could have been just get land for people and take them away from urban centers. Interesting.
But I think, that's a sort of additional, the supplementary thing. But the main thing is that to resolve the so there's another side. There's an important political aspect of this colonization scheme, because this is not really related to the topic that we are talking about. So this landlessness among the poor peasants is mainly because of the grabbing of land by a big landowning class. So there's a gradual evolution of a landowning class since about early 18th century. That is part of my PhD research. So they were grabbing land and becoming landowners at the expense of poor farmers.
So, I'm going to ask you a rather naive question. Was that the birth of aristocracy? Like the
yes, of course. Oh yeah. So even before the period that Kumari Jayawardena discussed in her, excellent book, The Nobodies to Somebodies. So she was mainly focused on 19th century development of bourgeois, but even before that, there's a proto-history to this class, where so they already became big land. All these big families, particularly in this Dutch-held areas. So there was a landowning class growing, and also in Kandyan territory. So this Kandyan aristocracy. So after the collapse of during the Kandyan kingdom, it's a different kind of land ownership. We don't have time to go into detail, but afterwards, so they also were able to control lands and become landowners. So this land ownership is so this because of this land ownership of this big landowners, and so they dominated much of the land in this area at the expense of poor farmers, right? And so therefore, so they didn't want to abandon their land. They didn't want to go for a comprehensive land reform process. If you go for a comprehensive land reform process, that's the idea that land reform is a kind of, how do you call it, sine qua non, no? They pronounce, that's an essential thing, very important, essential part of the modern economy. So you have to transform the land ownership, right? But the one of the biggest problem that Sri Lanka faced to initiate a comprehensive land reform process was that the ruling elite were mainly big landowners, so they didn't want to give up their lands, right? So then what they wanted, what they tried to, so that they saw that there are ample amount of large number of lands in the dry zone. So they tried to.
But to be fair, sir, Sirimao Bandaranaike did bring.
Yeah. So that's much later. That's much later.
Before this.
Yeah. So that's in 70s. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's. But the problem is that that was too late, right? So I'm not underestimating the importance of that reform, but that was too late, because even those lands, well, I mean, I think the management of those lands also not done properly, right? And so that did not really address the landlessness among the small holders, and particularly the paddy farmers.
Wasn't the land given directly to those who didn't own it, or is that a very idealistic way of looking
at it? No, actually, it's a very complicated thing. This land ownership is extremely complicated. I have about 2 chapters in my book, right? It's about this other system. There's a system called sharecropping, other system, right?
And one of the, again, because I'm a literature person, if you look at Nectar in the Sieve, it has some of the nicest other system. So there's a novel called Nectar in the Sieve. It's really sad, because no matter what you do, the moment the landowner wants you out, you're out. That's an Indian novel.
Yeah. But no, actually here, so the interesting thing, you cannot send the cultivator out of the land, but the problem is that you have to give him part of what you produce, right? For no reason. That's the only basis of the traditional kind of ownership. But it says nothing. And I mean, this ownership also quite problematic when you go into the history of this relation. So I mean, we don't have time to discuss that. But the all in all, the bottom line is this. Bottom line is that this situation produced a situation where there's the growing widespread landlessness among the poorer segments of the peasantry. Right, and then when population was rising, when there were more children in families, because they didn't have opportunity to engage in the peasant agriculture in a productive way, and also their social dreams were something else. Because so you cannot send these young people to Polonnaruwa or the wherever this dry zone. To have the agrarian life. So their social dream was towards moving towards the urban centers, right? So that is the root cause of this discontent. Every discontentedness is not simply a discontentedness, but it has a direction, right? So you reject a particular social situation, and you are dreaming to achieve something, right? So your dreams were urban oriented dreams, right?
So how is English connected to all this?
English connected is that the English was considered to be one of the keys to this new world, right? Not only English would be given opportunity for a good job, but it is something more than that, because English has a strong symbolic value, right? So when you know English, that You are considered to be a part of this new civilization, new society that you are in, right? So you have to, I mean, even now, right? So I think the modern civilization, to be a full member of the modern civilization, so you need a certain level of literacy, right? So you have to be literate. You know, this is a literate civilization, right? I mean, and this these cosmopolitan languages, I mean, enhance this your ability to you know, be a part of, be a kind of good member of this civilization. So therefore, the English was actually, you know, I mean, English is not only was there, but also used, you know, those who knew English make use of that knowledge to show that they are belonging to a different social class, right? And actually, you know, the more than, I mean, even for example, if you know English, even though if you don't have the economic, you know, the level, still you can claim that you are part of that class, right? So as we discussed in the morning, the class has different, I mean, two different conceptual you know, tradition on caste, that is Marxian tradition and Weberian tradition. The Marxians, the Marxist class analysis is mainly based on the economic aspect, whereas the Weber focus more on the social aspect, right? The class position and, you know, the class as status groups, right? So sometimes, you know, I mean, we can of course think of many concrete examples. So there are certain people, you know, I mean, there are a lot of people in our older generation, particularly in, you know, those who grew up in, I mean, the older generation than ours, our parents' generation, you know, there were some, even in rural areas, there are Mahatyas, you know, right? There are, you know, some Mahatturu, you know, the Khalisang Andina Mahatturu, right? So then when you dress up like, I mean, those days, so you should, if you want to.
That's kind of a leftover ideology of colonialism, right, sir?
Well, it's yeah, of course, you know, it's a kind of brown sahib, you know, mentality. But I'm a bit reluctant to, you know, link it to, yes, of course, it is part of colonial heritage because, you know, I mean, that's, but I would say that's a certain, you know, passage of this modernity, right? So when this modernization take place, it was, rather than colonialism, it was modernization who created this. Because, you know, actually, so there's a political reason for indigenous political elements to sort of question colonial domination. So they identify this also as a part of our colonial, you know, remnant. But I would say that this is a passage of, you know, I mean, when you look at Marty Wickramasinghe's Gamperaliya, so you see this, you know, it's so the people were transforming themselves. So they are trying to enter into a new social situation, new social, you know, status, group. And so the English is becoming one of them.
True. Before I go into that, sir, could you define the way you use modernity in this context, please?
Well, modernity, I mean, I define the modernity in relation to the development of the idea, you know, particularly the new kind of civilization that started after you know, the Renaissance in Europe in the 15th, 16th centuries. I mean, this this created a kind of new civilization, right? So then you have the humanism, right? And you have the Enlightenment project, right? And then with this transformation, so then which was of course linked to industrial revolution and so on, you know, you have the modern nation state, the modern state, the democratic state, bringing all these aspects together, it created a kind of new life, new way of life, right? And so when you look at for example, you know, that's, I have discussed that in my exhibition also. So there's a kind of structure of new life, right? So this is linked to what you think about the society, you know, what you think about yourself, you know, how do you organize the society, right? For example, you know, the politically, socially. And so this is different from any ideal social order that was imagined before this new social imagination that emerged after the Renaissance in Europe.
Correct. And
right?
and could even say it's more rationality based than spiritual based.
Yeah, so the rationality, and also there are, we have this new notion about the human, right? And actually the equality. So so you have,
yeah,
right?
So this is not the right place to ask it, but then there are people who ask whether Sri Lanka actually got the modern period. So well, that's a different thing. What is your take on that?
Well, I think, you know, I'm there, you know, as a more modernist. Maybe I might be criticized by many, you know, particularly some very good friends who are strong post-colonialists. I'm a more modernist. So therefore, I'm trying to understand certain aspects of in the colonial history, which are not necessarily negative, right? Because, you know, certain things came to us through, you know, colonialism. I mean, we have no choice, right? But of course, I'm aware that, you know, there are a lot of negative sides, you know, that, right?
But I think, sir, even the post-colonialists would agree there has been positive things like, you know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So I think
but they might be more critical about the colonial heritage than me myself.
Let's move on. I think this is a different discussion.
They would say that, you know, I have a little orientation to something bit to whitewash, you know, a colonial heritage a little bit. I wouldn't be very much, you know, worry about that criticism, but I want to highlight is the fact that you know, there's something more than what is necessarily colonial in what happened, right? So that's what I want. Even this particular class who knew English,
you said
and so
you were saying Mahathuru Dangwala. Oh.
Yeah, for me, the more than some, you know, how do you say, the remnants of colonial heritage. So they are actually agents of social transformation, modern social transformation. They were the people, you know, who introduced certain things, and new politics, and right, new cultural life to these rural areas, and right. So they played a massive role, you know, very important role, right? So these so-called Kalusuddas, brown sahibs, right? Even some the nationalist intellectuals, even though they didn't wear, they also read the Baniyama. They also, you know, the bilingual, you know, people. For example, Kumaratung Bonidas, for example, right? So he also, of course, well-dressed person, right? So they were the people actually. This bilingualism it is something more than, the economic thing,
Of course. So were
Yeah.
there many of those bilinguals in rural villages, which is where you're right now focusing on?
I think, it's not really, there may be the bilingual in some areas. I think the when you are bilingual, so you don't stay. So I don't think that there are.
That very sentence gave us a clue. When you're bilingual, you don't necessarily stay in a rural village. So that's
rural,
the key.
yeah,
That's
yes,
exactly what you're saying. It's like, I always
right.
feel
Particularly in small hamlets, for example. So when you look at the rural landscape is a highly complicated, space, right? And so there are different kind of, if you map it out, so there are different circles, right? So you have these urban centers and small urban things, and also there are some areas where, there are some areas where you have Christian schools, for example, right? So around which, so there's a kind of rural literati, and right. So it's a this very much part of this the transformation of rural societies, and there the English played a major role. And when you look at the older generation, for example, the generation that you find in literary representations like Diruvira Sarachandra, Gunadasa Amarasekara, Siri Gunasinghe, and so on. So you see this sentiment that, about parents belonging to middle class, background, some well-off families. So they were eager to, send their children to good school, either in Colombo or in, the church-based schools, where the, medium of instruction is English, right? And so this bilingualism is very much part of modernization process, right? And so this created a massive impact in rural areas. And when what is the free education was introduced, so so this desire for bilingualism, or for the learning English, the trickle down, right? And also
I'm going to just step back a little bit. So this was then the Christian missionary schools that were making an impact now in this whole process?
Actually, yes, and the missionary schools and Christian monasteries, and so they made a huge impact, no? And actually, even the Buddhist schools were modeled on the basis of Christian schools, right? And it is well known that the secret behind the growth of a very vibrant English-educated middle class in the north, among the Tamil people, is the fact that the Christian
and
missionaries started schools very early.
Exactly, and the American missionaries, especially.
The American missionaries. So they started in Batiklo, in Mana, in Jaffna.
Yeah.
And,
so my connected question is then, like, I'm trying to link this with the youth unrest, which is going to be our final thing. So we can kind of summarize it into saying that it was built on the Christian school, like the education that was in English, which is connected to fee living schools also, which is connected to wealth.
Yeah.
Right? Apart from the fee living schools, English wasn't available.
No, actually, yeah. So fee living school, and also so if you have, and also so they had a Christian, the conversion drive also, no. So perhaps you can, enter into church order, and as priest, and there were of course, that there were, I think that there
was a religious aspect also.
Yeah, there's a religious aspect also.
Right.
And so there were P11, but always if you are, if you want to go up in the education ladder, you still can go up, but education was not widespread phenomenon at that time, particularly in the 19th century. It was a kind of, because those days the rural poor was not interested in, the education, because I think that they are so they didn't dream, going out of, they couldn't think about, there are some cases, for example, I don't know whether you have seen this two movies, twin movies by Dharmasiri Bandaranaga, Bavaduka and Bavakarma, where the
I haven't seen them. I've just heard of them.
Where the child of one family, the main family, and so that's by accident, he ended up in a Christian mission, and so apart from those incidents, accidental occasion, and the rural poor didn't have a desire to go up in the ladder. But this happened, in the 20th century. When what happened in the 20th century, these ideas about, that was growing up in the top layer of society in 19th century trickled down gradually because of the, spread of newspapers and various things. So they strengthened, and also, importantly, because of the deepening of democracy, particularly the universal franchise, right? So people began to vote, and they come to realize that they also, so they also can
have some
play
power,
a role
finally.
in political transformations.
Finally,
right?
have some power, no, sir? Yeah, that would have been such a
right. So their social imagination also changed, right? So then when free education started, and then education for all, and the central schools, this Madhya Mahavidyalaya system, and it's a massive revolutionary process, right? So it created the big imagination. Just think about the novels that we read in our young days. For example, the novels like, let's say, Golu Hadawata, right? Set in a typical rural countryside, in Horana area, right? These are these novels represented the situation in 1960s, right? So just think about, their social dreams, right? So they were not like children of, they're not like their parents. So they have a different kind of social dreams, social expectations, right? So I'm sorry, it was this generation. It was this generation, this 60s generation, that we can link with this the phenomenon that we are talking about, the youth unrest, and the role of English. And so this is
basically our generation, no, Nirmal?
Yeah. It's even a generation before us. Even not, our generation is much a bit later, but we are talking about, even I remember my aunts, right? My father's sisters, right? So one of my father's sisters, so she was born in 1950, right? So she studied A-level. That was one of my inspiration, because she did political science, Sinhala, and I remember. So she was saying that this famous you don't know, I think you're familiar, the name, the Edmund Vijay Singh. The Edmund Vijay Singh is one of the actors of the original Maname play. I think he's Purohita, I mean, he's one of the main characters. So the Edmund Vijayasinghe was the principal of the school that my aunt went to. So one of the schools in our village area, right? So that's a school that you see in the Tumanghandiya movie of Mahagama Sekara, right? So she always remind us how their principal took them to watch Maname, where he also acting, right? So I mean, it's a kind of the new thing, right? So they were exposed to a new world, right? And so this is a different kind of world, right? And so even school culture, right? Even the school culture that you see in a novel like Golu Hadawata, it's a completely new phenomenon, right? I think that's where you see the social and cultural dream of that particular generation, right? So I mean, these are the people who in a way rebelled in 71. I think if my memory is correct, I think Karunasena Jayalatha also was arrested in 71. I think he was, because so it's I think he had these sentiments in his novels.
From the hope that they had to the arrest, what happened? Where did it go wrong? From the hope,
yeah,
like we jumped into the arrest. What happened? Yeah. What went wrong?
No, well, what went wrong was that so I think there was always the issue. This revolutionary sentiments are very interesting, right? So you want to you desire something completely different, right? So I think I have this the book by the A.C. Alas. I have the Sinhala version. So where at the end, so he quote from a novel of Agatha Christie about about the sentiments of the youth about social injustice and so on, right? So it says that in your youth, the anarchy. So you love anarchy, right? This has the Sinhala translation. If I say in Sinhala, Tharuna kaledi arajika tattwa be sidgani. Obata alut loak womanawe. You desire the new world, right? Right? So oba visin palamuwen kaliyutte paranalo kada damima. First thing you have to do is to completely how do you say destroy the old world, right? And so you want to
I'm just trying to get it over my head. That was Agatha Christie who writes detective novels.
Yes, of course, yes.
Trying to figure out in what context.
Yes.
Does it? I'm just curious because I love her so much. Does it say which one has that?
The novel?
Yes.
No, I don't think that
he cited it.
He mentioned
I would not have pegged her for any political kind of commentary.
No, actually, this is exactly the first time that I have heard of. I haven't read Agatha Christie, and actually, so this is the first time that I heard about Agatha Christie from the Alice's thing, and I also know. It is only later time that I came to know that that she was writing about writing detective. But anyhow, that's a very nice passage. Maybe well, this about so you want to destroy the old world in order to bring a new world, right? But you don't have, reordering the society is a much formidable task, much more formidable task than, you know, this young generation who are, you know, in the age of, I mean, if you look at the average age of insurgents, most of them are in their early 20s, right? Can you believe that, you know, the young group of people in their early 20s, right, trying to, you know, I mean, turn the entire society upside down, right? And so that's a problem, you know, that was the problem.
Was that attempt in any way linked to language, sir? Or did language have a...
not, I mean, if you ask the question in that way, I don't know. But, you know, I would say language is very much part of it, because it is a very much part of it in the sense that I mean, what they desire is a new world. What they desire was a kind of a, you know, new social order, right? So this is, I mean, it is not the world that was run by, you know, Sinhala or Tamil, right? It is a world that was run by, you know, English, right? I mean, that's why, you know, it's a more than a language. You know, it has a much more broader meaning than language. So therefore, so it's a, I mean, even I mean, in a way, they hated English. They hated English not because they didn't want English. They hated it because they wanted it, right? So they wanted it. So they knew that, you know, it was, you know, that was one of the determinant aspect of, I mean, that's why actually.
That's right? A social capital, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's and also it's a I mean, it's a very important psychological thing that, you know, when you are desire for something, so I mean, you may have the tendency, when you cannot achieve it, you tend to hate it, right? But that hatred doesn't mean that, you know, you don't need it. You really need it. I mean, you have this paradoxical situation in relation to English language. And even if, you know, you tend to, you know, when you look at, for example, student politics, right? And now actually it is somewhat different. I mean, there was a time that, you know, you have a very negative approach towards English learning. You call it kaduwa, and, you know, I mean, so when you see someone, when you see people, you know, with good knowledge of English, it's not that, you know, that you are trying to build contact with them and learn English from them, but you are trying to, you know, I mean, identify them as a kind of different group of people, and right. So I mean, you behave as if, you know, I mean, so you identify the knowing English as a kind of symbol of cultural, how do you call it?
And you call it hegemony, sir?
Not really hegemony. I told you that, you know, sometimes I forget some, you know, very common words.
So do I, sir.
Cultural degeneration, right?
Right.
Right. It's the Sanskritika
Parihaniya.
Sanskritika Parihaniya. Deshiya Bhasha. So you forget your local culture and so on.
I would say that those attitudes are still very much prevalent. Though you might say, I think those attitudes are still very much prevalent, sir. Because I am now, I'm trying to teach. But like, even if you take social media, you know, the dislike, those who know English, especially if it's women, they say posh gano.
Yeah.
The posh is a very...
The word posh, in particularly the way in which the word posh was being used in student politics,
yes, is still being used.
I remember very well. I think so those English speaking, you know, the English medium students were identified as a completely different. I mean, the inability of the most of the English medium students to cope up with work with, you know, the other the other student, not because of they didn't want to do that, but there's a kind of barrier, sometimes. So they, I mean, it's as if the students from a non-English and rural background, they might think that if they're exposed to this kind of posh group, so they will face a kind of identity crisis where their cultural, let's say, their cultural backwardness would be exposed, and they might be perceived as a kind of right?
Yeah, that word backward is also very interesting, sir, because they themselves have identified as that being backward.
Yeah,
no, another fight.
Interesting, now yeah, actually, it's the one need to do a very, it's a very good area to study this with a discourse analysis method. I mean, how these terms are being used.
Yes, because sir, by self-identifying the not knowing of English as a position of being backward, that's extremely harmful, because that is to consider English as intelligence also, and forget the structural inequalities that did not allow them to have it. So my problem is our self-identification of the fact of not knowing English can be extremely harmful, and thereby compound the complications of the matter that already exists. Because, sorry, you go ahead.
No, I mean, I agree that this has the English has created an extremely problematical psychological context. So where, I mean, you have a kind of very how do you say, what's the word? Not ambiguous, I mean, kind of
complex. Yeah, complex, complicated.
Not complex. I mean, how do you say? What is the word for debity?
I don't know. Now, when you ask me, sir, it's not just you, all of us. It's not just
it's
you.
Create a kind of,
well, two-faced,
kind of,
dual, dialectic.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a debidicama. That's an English word.
Duality. Duality?
Not really dual, but so you need it, but you cannot achieve it. Midi ambulai midi.
Sour grapes. Sour grapes, right? You can't have it.
Yeah. So that's that kind of mentality.
I think the word you can use is a conflicted. Situation. You need.
It's a conflicted situation. Yes. But that's a word, which I have forgotten.
Right? Which I don't know.
Right. So this, well, this sentiment, this debidiness, right? I mean, is a very much part of this generation. It's very much part of this. I mean, it's also when you look, when you observe, when you scrutinize the nature of the youth politics, you see this the dual approach toward
you want to call it schizophrenic?
It's a schizophrenic thing. I mean, on one hand, that you desire, you desire to be in that part, but you see that it has a very distant and difficult goal to achieve, and so then you hate, right? I mean, that is actually one of the root causes of the violence, right? When you look at how the violence was practiced, right? So the violence has a I mean, multiple aspects, right? The violence is not necessarily the political violence. When you look at political violence, the political violence may be used to defeat your enemy, right? So I mean, you are trying to achieve a particular political goal, that let's say capture the state power. And so then the state is protected by military and, the various other elements that are use violence. So then you unleash a counter violence by way of having your own revolutionary army and so on, right? So that's a basic, aspect of political violence. But there are more than that. You may kill particular targets, and right. And when you look at this, particularly the hatred towards the old left, right, and hatred towards some, the cultural, the bourgeois, certain bourgeois cultural elements. So these aspect has a very strong psychological aspects, right?
So the irony of the old left being hated is to do with the fact that the old left was extremely westernized, and most of them studied in the West and, were very fluent and English speaking. So one question I asked you in the Sinhala interview, Professor, was that there must have been an internal difference between the 1971 insurrection and the 88 insurrection, because the 1971 would have grown in the shadow of the old left, which was necessarily English speaking and from the elite, right? But that may not have lasted till 1988, because social structure has, the fabric of society has changed quite a lot. So what different roles did the knowledge of English play in both these, sir?
No, I think, I think the second insurrection, the situation was much more intense than the first one, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, your point is quite valid. So this, the discarding the old left is multidimensional. It has a very, obvious political aspect. So that is that, the old left was blamed by the so-called new left as revisionist in the sense that, they have given up revolution. So they are no longer interested in revolution or revolutionary transformation of society. So they wanted to ally themselves with the bourgeois parties, right? And happy with few ministerial positions. And so they have betrayed the noble political goals that they espouse.
That would
right?
have come at the latter half, no, sir. But at the beginning, there would have been complete acceptance of that.
Yeah, no, that this happened in 1960s, no?
Yeah.
1964, when the left parties joined with the SLFP to form government and become a part of SLFP-led government. So this this criticism was there. I mean,
when the LSSP was formed in 1953, sir, what was it?
No, LSSP was formed in 1935.
35, right? very
Yeah.
back in time, right? So my question is, at that time, there couldn't have been much resistance from the poorest classes towards an English-speaking elite, because they were simply the leaders of that movement.
At that time, it was a complete different
Exactly.
situation. And actually, interesting, when these left leaders went to rural areas, so that actually, it's a very interesting part of the history of the left. The left leaders went to rural areas during the malaria epidemic in 1930s, right? Early part of 1930s, right? And actually at that time, the rural poor people have virtually been abandoned. There were no health facilities and so on. Even the colonial government failed to, provide necessary care for them. And So there are a lot of oppressive social structures in place, particularly caste structures, and and it was in that context that these left leaders, right, went to these villages and treated them as equals, right? It's interesting, there are a lot of stories that how people were shocked. This rural poor people were shocked when these gentlemen, well dressed and spoke in English, and called them sahodara and sahodari, right? I mean, I think usually the usual thing is you have to call them mahatya, hamu mahatya, and that kind of honorific ways of addressing. But I mean, they have violated completely that kind of hierarchical the ways of addressing people, and so they treated the ordinary people as equals, and so they also wanted these people to address them in the same way,
because
right?
they would have walked into a very feudal system.
Yes.
And then to have a sahodara sahodari address would have been quite
and then initially it was a shock for them, but later on it became a kind of they had a massive respect for these leaders, these people, right? And it is out of that respect, I mean, they could become the political leadership of those areas. And for example, the I mean, areas like Ruwanwella, Dehiyovita, Kiriyal, Agalawatta, I mean, extremely rural areas, the Akuras and these areas, the left leaders could easily win the popular elections, defeating very strong, powerful feudal leaders. I mean, for example, N.M. Pereira won the 1936 election in Ruwanwella by defeating the daughter of the Mideniya Adhikaram, the wife of the first speaker, the Francis Molamure, the Lady Adeline Molamure, right? She won uncontested in 1931. Yeah, well, maybe, but anyhow, so then N.M. Pereira, who was a complete outsider to the area, he was from Totalanga, right? He's a complete outsider. He was there only few years, I mean, by voluntarily engaging in, this malaria. I mean, so he was called Paripu Mahatya in that area because they distributed the, I mean, Paripu and, the medicine, right? Quinine, right? And then, I mean, he could defeat.
I was thinking, sir, then the final disappointment with what their leaders did would have been so much the harder to bear, no? Or was the resentment sudden, or was it growing? Did they see that this was finally the N.M. Pereira's kind of turn into more conventional right-wing politics, or at least joining them?
No, it's not a conversion to right wing. He never converted to, I mean, right wing politics, but so this, I mean, moving to the center left.
Maybe
I would say these terms are very important because those days the UMP was considered to be the right wing, party. Yes. I mean, the SLFP considered to be a kind of middle path, and right. But this young group, this youth. So even that move is a kind of betrayal of the revolutionary, ideas, right? And then, even though this the youth from rural areas without much political literacy were not interested in these theoretical discussions, these messages that was get across by this the young political leadership, right, was attractive, right? I mean, so I have mentioned in the morning that that there are a number of stories by the leading insurgents in 1971, how easy for them to recruit rural youth, right? So I have several examples, like, the Sunanda Deshapriya, the well-known journalist and activist, who was sent to Badulla, right? He was from Ambalangoda. He was sent to Badulla as the leader in that in the Badulla district to organize, right? So he was there without, having any contacts there. But in his memories, he tells that he went there. He had only money for the train ticket, and so then so he stayed that night in a abandoned small hut in a hena, right, and so you have the similar example, the similar story by another leader, Keli Senanayak, who was also from Ambalangoda, and he was sent to Dambulla also with only money, only the bus fare, and he went there. He didn't have any contact, but both of them, they were successful in mobilizing a large number of young people there, right? So they have only very small political, simplified political message, right? And then, so this political message was, because that actually that addressed to their, the anti-systemic sentiments, right? Because they saw the system does not give them any hope, right? So that's the thing, they identify. I mean, you might be interested in knowing, how do you fix English to this narrative, right? This narrative of
Yes.
rebellion, the insurrection. Because the English, as I mentioned again and again, English was considered to be the major tool of this, right? Apart from the wealth, right? Of course, wealth is a factor, but English also important factor. So I think if I may repeat the story that I mentioned about, I have heard, I think it's from K. Jayatilaka, where he narrated perhaps it's in his autobiographical work, one instance where he was taken to, by someone else to meet a leader of the left. Most probably, I think he is referring to N.M. Pereira, right, and some others. So they were discussing some issues, and the person that went with him know English, and so the conversation took place in English, it seems, right? But the K.J. Tilaka, he didn't. Well, that's what it's not right. What happened was that the conversation was done in English, but whenever they want to ask something from him, so they would shift to Sinhala, and so he says that they were like the birds and
Eagles,
the beacons, and so then when they want to grab the prey, they would come down and grab it and go back, right? So that kind of the distance.
You had to descend to talk to Sinhala like an eagle and then go up again.
Yeah, so that's how this cultural difference was created. You perceive the world of those who use English as a completely different world. It's a distant world, that world that you cannot reach, and the world that you reject, right? And so that.
So the free education system, which has kicked in by this time, was really not helping. This is connected to my discussion with Dr. Prabha Manuratna, where she has shown that yes, free education opened and made everything democratic at the base, but when it went up, those doors in which employment and admittance to a different class remained as narrow as ever. So maybe that also created, that bottleneck also created a lot of frustration. Maybe the hope that was given at the beginning, it was not realized at the end of the journey. Is that
Well,
also part of it?
how I see this, I think this is not, well, I don't know, I mean, perhaps I would say that was to a certain extent unavoidable, right? Because what happened was that this free education opened up a massive avenue for very large population, but our social structures, our economic structures, even our education structures were not sufficient enough to, meet the expectations of that generation, right? And so that's how that bottleneck was created, right? And in a way that is unavoidable, but I mean, it was unavoidable at a massive cost, right? Yeah, well, when I'm looking at, as a student of history, when I'm looking at the larger picture, right? I tend to believe that, maybe one may call it somewhat deterministic, but in my view, it was unavoidable. Unavoidable in the sense that, uh, that is the outcome, the immediate outcome of how the transformation occurred, right? So I mean, for example, so there were some situations. For example, look at French Revolution, right? The French Revolution was massively, violent, right? It was a terrible, I mean, it's a, right? So you even can't think about, right?
There was no language issue there though, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mainly economic.
I'm sorry?
There was no language issue particularly connected to the French Revolution.
No, but I'm talking about why I took, I mean, then French Revolution also, it created that, it's a kind of open the floodgate, right? And then everyone come and express themselves. They aspire everything, right? And here also, what happened is that, the democracy, I mean, the universal franchise was given, and then came free education, and then came independence. So these three moments are very important. Right. The 31, so that is universal franchise, 44, free education, and 48, right? So these are the 2-3 important landmarks, right? Which was given hope for, massive, I mean, this new, the growing population. Right?
Correct. Yeah.
And so then all of a sudden, there was a massive, the population, how do you say, the rallying of large number of people at the gate of a new world, right? With new expectations, right? And so that's kind of created a massive tension between the existing social orders, and the existing social orders were so pressurized to accommodate this new demand. And actually, of course, the new universities were created, but what to do with them? The two, 1956, and actually the 1956 was very important. What happened in 1956? So that was given a kind of new hope to this rural social, I mean, 1956.
Which is the year that the Sinhala Only Act came into place, just to...
Yeah, so I think the Sinhala Only Act, it's a part of it, but, it's a kind of a new rural awakening. It was, and actually, if you look at 1948 as the independence, but actually, 56 was the moment that idea of freedom, idea of liberty trickled down to the rural areas. And it brought about a revolutionary change, not in the traditional world, but it's really a revolution, right? But then this revolution did not fulfill the entire, I mean, and actually it's not, did not fulfill anything, but actually it created more expectations, right? So it created more expectations. I mean, the political leadership of 1956 is mainly the rural middle class.
Yeah, Panchamaha Balavega.
Panchamaha, mainly the Sanghaveda Guru. No, that's the most important. Sanghaveda Guru is the rural middle class, right? So those are the people that you encounter in for example, my famous example is from Gunadasa Amarasekara's novels. So there's a character called Bala Mahatya. And also, I mean, main protagonist, the Piyadasa's family. Piyadasa's father is a Mahatya, mother is a school teacher. In Bala Mahatya is a kind of a rural, indigenous intellectual, right? And so this is a distinct social class, right? But this awakening, the political and cultural awakening in rural areas, produce certain effects, particularly in terms of expanding education, the university education, the establishment of your own university, the Vidyodaya and Vidyalankara and so on. So these gave birth to, I mean, the deepening of this new modern
empowerment, kind of a feeling of empowerment.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. You just divided the Panchamaha Balavega also into two different classes, right? You put Sanghaveda Guru into the kind of people with some, and Govikam Karu is below that?
Well, so it's a long story. The Govikam Karu is actually, I mean, you have to understand it in the context of, because, I mean, you cannot, well, you had this, the Mahajana Eksat Peramuna alliance where the Philip Gunawardana's party, at that time, Viplavakari Lanka Samasamaja Pakshe. It's a split away group from the LSSP, right? So they also part of it. Later on, they use the term, now their party using the Mahajana Eksat Peramuna, that Dinesh Gunawardana, their sons. But, I mean, they represented the, the working class and, some of the rural poor. So it was them, who, but actually when you look at the core of the 1956 political transformation, the leadership, it was politically led by this rural middle class, who represent this Sanghaveda, I would say, not only Sanghaveda Guru, but also there's notaries and, these kind of notaries.
I see. Okay.
So the notaries were, one of the important element of the rural intelligentsia.
Are they like lawyers or a lesser type of lawyers?
Not really lawyers, but they register the lands and right. So I mean,
like the clerk level, legal clerk.
The clerk level functions, right? So that's a very respected thing. I mean, there are a lot of and also the Tapal Mahatya, right? So and so that's a kind of middle level. So they were not poor people, but they were not top rich either. And so that's a kind of rural middle class. They had some land ownership.
Newton Gunasinghe has said rural petty bourgeois.
Yeah, rural petty bourgeois.
Petty bourgeois.
So he says rural petty bourgeois. Yeah. I would say I would like to use middle level land owning class.
Okay.
Right. I'm a bit uncomfortable with the term petty bourgeois.
Okay.
Right. And so there are different classes that you can consider to be, part of this petit bourgeois, right? So that's a different thing. And so then what happened with 56, that, the revolution was further trickled down, right? It empowered, it gave hopes to more people. So that's how the rural poor also got the opportunity to be part of the education, get education. And I mean, they are the people who organized by the JVP, right? And the new leadership. And so this continued. And when you come to the second insurrection, that was that's where I feel much at home, because I knew that generation personally. Every aspect, almost every aspect of it, because that's part of my own life as well. And actually, what is interesting in 1960s, I mean, your social expectations were much more organized in 1980s when it comes, compared to 60s, right? So you knew much about, right? So that I think that when you look at the universities, the 71, of course, there were JVP activities in universities, but compared to 80s, it was not really widespread. But when you look at 1980s, right? So you might remember as well, the universities is completely dominated by the JVP politics, right? And also, the many schools, the advanced level schools. And so what is the secret? I mean, the secret is that those days, these young people, so they were more politically literate, politically literate in the sense that, they knew what they have been deprived of, right? So their expectations are much more explicit, right? And actually, the 71, it was very vague, right? And also,
where would you place the starting of the first insurrection, sir? Like, where would you place the birth of the JVP, for example?
Now, birth of the JVP is actually, I would say it started in 1966. So when the Rohana Vijayveera, he was refused the visa to return to Soviet Union to complete his, continue his education in Patrice Lumumba University. Apparently for political reason, some rumors that some people have complained to the Russian authorities that the embassy, local, the Sri Lankan embassy, Russian embassy, that, he's a supporter of Chinese line. So those days there was a big conflict between Russian line and Soviet line, because
Chinese speaking, Russian.
No, it's a kind of it's a two lines for communism.
Yes. What are they, sir?
No, actually, the Russia, there was a close connection between the Soviet Communist Party and Russian Chinese Communist Party during the time before Stalin, during the time of Joseph Stalin.
Yeah.
Right. There was some tension, but they are part of one. Right. So then, 1953, the Soviet Communist Party, after the death of Joseph Stalin, started the process of reforming itself. Particularly to it's a kind of so they develop a strong criticism against what Stalin did. Particularly his way of authoritarian way of handling party affairs and so on. certainly some of his policies, and also his policies toward the West, and right, and so on. And then, so they developed this idea of peaceful coexistence, and particularly under Khrushchev, right? And the China, so Chinese policy was different. So there were different explanation about this split. But in early 1960s, this Russian-Chinese debate reached a very serious level, and so this created tension within communist parties in many countries outside China and Soviet Union, right? In many the communist parties all over the world, because those days there was a communist, the organization called international organization called Third International or Communist International. It was also called Comintern, and also later on it was transformed into Cominform, and right. So there were communist parties who were mainly the pro-Soviet, and then after this de-Stalinization process, after the Khrushchev, I mean, there were some there were some elements in these local communist parties who were pro-Chinese. As a result of that, there were splits in the parties, and even in Sri Lanka in 1963, the Communist Party bifurcated. The one group led by well-known left leader Shanmugadasan, and also there were other figures like Premalal Kumarasiri, and some leading figures in the Communist Party left the Communist Party and formed a new party that also called Sri Lanka Ceylon Communist Party. It's called Chinese Peking Wing, right? The other one is called Moscow Wing, right?
It normally comes in a bracket, no? So after both, there's a bracket.
Yeah. So afterward, the Chinese Communist Party was perceived to be more revolutionary, right? So the more so they preached armed struggle and Chinese type of revolutionary struggle to overthrow the revolutionary regimes and so on. So the Rohana Vijayavira became a member of this party. He joined the Chinese party in '66, and so he was given the task of organizing the youth wing of the party by assigning him as, I think, the national organizer of the youth organization, right? So he traveled around the country, and he built the kind of group around, his leadership. I think that was the beginning of the JVP, right? So there were other parallel organizations as well, right? So who organized these young people, but the Vijayavira's specificity that he took this message to the rural level, and particularly to the uneducated. I mean, the groups who are not politically literate, but who had this discontent toward the system. The society. We were talking about this discontented class, no? So what JVP did was that JVP exactly addressed to the sentiments of that discontented, the rural young people, right?
They did
so
it so effectively but they did it so effectively, sir, within like about 4 or 5 years.
Within like 4 or 5 years, they were capable of mobilizing the whole generation to rebel against the state. Right? Even though that was not successful, that was not a joke that, that you organize, hundreds of thousands of young people to rebel against the state.
And it also shows how ready they were to protest.
How ready they were. Oh, exactly. Yes. It is not an easy decision to rebel or take up arms again, attacking, right? So, and also the other thing is that, why I said that, the 1980s generation is much more mature, because those days, 1970, 71, the state is not very strong, right? Physically, state machinery, the violent, the state machinery appeared in rural areas in the form of a the police station, where police people, they even wouldn't carry firearms, right? So they would only carry a baton, right? This with, the wearing shorts and, right? You remember this old police people. And so there's no large number of, guns in police station. So the people perceive the police station as the symbol of the state. They consider that if you capture the police, it's like you capture the area, you can dominate the whole area. So that's what exactly.
The state was invisible technically, no?
Yeah, the state was invisible, right? But in 80s, that's different, because of this, I think 71 also changed the situation, and you have this northern insurgency, right? And then the army was developed, and right, police also, the state was much more visible. And this young generation also, the universities transformed, and this is so they were much more ready.
Not only was the state much more visible, but the state was a definite threat, wasn't it, sir? Because when the 83 riots happened, the J.R. Jayawardena government blamed it on the JVP mainly, driving it underground. And it wasn't an underground, I think when you joined, it wasn't an underground movement at all.
No, it was not an underground movement. So it was not, but there's an underground element. Okay. I'll tell you, I told you in the morning also, because, even though it was not underground movement, because, the Rona Vijayveera contested for the presidential election, but the ordinary members, people like us who just join and, listen to these 5 lessons with the Pantipaha and, other political messages. Most of these events were organized in a clandestine manner, that I remember. So the classes were held.
But it wasn't underground, sir. Why was it clandestine?
It was clandestine because, that also, that was, I think for me, that's for 2 reasons. One is that, so the JVP was of the opinion that at any time, the state, although they had the opportunity to engage in public political activities, so they were alerted that, at any time, the state may be mobilized against them. And so they always keen to maintain a structure that cannot be, that is not publicly visible.
Okay, and this could be maybe from the 71 they learned a lesson.
Yeah. From 71 experience, what they thought that it is better to keep that, hidden network. So that is for strategic reason. But in addition to that strategic reason, I don't know they did it deliberately or not. So there was a symbolic aspect as well. The symbolic in the sense that, for example, in my case, it was so attractive to be part of a clandestine network. You know what I mean? So
especially if you're young, no, sir.
When you are young, and also there's another side. Not only when you are young, but also when you hate the old order, right? When you perceive the old order as something that does not belong to you, when you see the old order as something completely detached you from, the not allowed to be a full member of it, right? And also you desire, you imagine that only way to be there is to destroy it, build a new order. That, you know, your desire is to build a parallel world, right? Not having political rallies in, you know, nice environment like the JVP is having now, you know. But, you know, the place that we had our classes in a very small house of a, you know, poor party member. So when we were there, so there were children all over the place, and, you know, they would eat rice, and, you know, the rice is everywhere, and mothers is trying to feed them, and, you know, they make noise. In the meantime, you know, our JVP local activists, so we put 2 small chairs in a corner, and so he teach us they take the lessons, right? So that kind of atmosphere is we feel like, okay, well, so we build the movement with
I'm
this.
just going to interrupt with an English question, sir. Yeah. So English would not have had a place in the second time the insurrection happened like it did in the first. Because first, at least there were leftists with elitist ideas talking in English, teaching in English probably. But in
well, you know, I think here, I think the problem was much more serious this time than the earlier. I think for early generation, I think it was how do you call it? This is not something that I have really thought about seriously, but I feel that this English issue was much more serious in 80s than 1971, right? Because, you know, the political activities in the urban areas, particularly in universities, and, you know, were much more widespread in late 80s than 71, right? And I think, you know, they so I think when you look at the political activism, the level of political activism you see in medical faculties, it's very important, you know. So can you believe that, you know, even right? There were some well-known names like this Padma Sri Trima Vitarana, right?
Medical faculty, it's very surprising, sir, because now that will be the last place that gets politically activated. What do you think was the reason that the medical faculties were very involved in the second insurrection?
Yeah, so that's that's not a question that can be asked. You know, that you have to understand the structure of this insurrection. I'll give you an interesting example. There was one well-known activist of Colombo medical faculty who was actually killed. His name was Sarath Kollure, right? He was the leading activist of the Inter-University Student Federation. So he was in the the list of student heroes, even displaying universities nowadays. Sarath Kollure is my classmate, right? When I was in grade 4 and 5. So in my village, he was from my village. He was from a very, was economically bit well off than my family, but still a poor family. We were together, and so he passed grade 5 scholarship exam, where I failed. So actually, those days there were 2 examinations. One is to first examination. You sit. You have to qualify to sit for the scholarship examination proper. So there were 5 from our schools, including myself. 3 of them passed and 2 of them failed, myself and another one. And this Sarath Kollure, he, from scholarship examination, he got an opportunity to go to, I think, Nalanda College. Nalanda. From Nalanda, he went to medical faculty, right? And it was from a rural background, right? So I think, I mean, again, traditionally, the medical faculties are perceived to be the sort of places where you have the, children of the doctors and, the elite. But now, there was a situation where there were a lot of people from a completely different background, right? So they are actually, I mean, medical faculties were the best places where you experience firsthand this cultural difference, right? So you are forced to behave in a, I mean, so in a medical faculty, that you have, I mean, you are taught in English and, so on, right? So this cultural tension is there. And so when you are not, I mean, so it is actually in other universities, when you are not English speaking, you cannot, if you cannot follow lectures in English, and if you cannot speak in English, so you always have the opportunity to have your own
Crowd.
Club, right? So you can sort of distance yourself from. And actually, English speaking, the posh crowd is a minority now, right?
But then you're never isolated because you have a crowd of your own also.
You have
a whole group calling them Kultur and Posh and whatnot. You're not alone.
Yeah, but in medical faculties, you have no choice, right? You have no choice. You see this the class difference, right? I mean, so that's one way that I understand. I mean, I managed to. I met several times. After he came to the medical faculty, I didn't meet Sarath Kolture very often because he is in the JVP. I'm in the other side of the JVP, right? But I remember how he spoke about, he became the well-known orator. I mean, I remember he was debating with some students in Colombo University at one time, at one event. Yeah, so I saw the mindset, right? So this mindset, I mean, when you are there, when you have this rebellious mindset, where you see this English-speaking society as a kind of, barrier that created for your, against what you achieve. And when you are there, you see the enemy. The enemy is so visible, right? I mean, there were other aspects, for example, one may cite that, famous incidents of Ragama Medical College, incident North Colombo Medical School, issue and so on. But there's also a cultural issue, I guess. So I think this, again, English is very much part of this bigger cultural problem. So it's no longer the problem of the language. The problem of language.
We are going to talk about the future later, but I think the medical college context hasn't changed very much, sir. Because
now actually it is different.
I think the class conflict or the non-English speaking people meeting the other lot face to face is very much there, because about two months ago I was invited to talk to the Colombo medical faculty, and then as a head of the English language unit at Japura, I was in touch with the medical faculty there. the tension is still there, sir, very much so.
Yeah, no, I think the tension is there, but I think the structure of the tension is changed. I think that, I mean, that's why I think that, you know, I mean, you have to ask the question, you know, after 71, so the second insurrection started, right, after 16 years, right? So then, but now it is more than 30 years since 1990. So one may ask the question as to why it didn't repeat again, like it repeated after 71, right? Why was that? You know, that was because of certain transformation that occurred in, you know, in larger society, right? And now actually, when you look at the present generation, the generations after, you know, 1980s, the economies were expanding, and, you know, there are a lot of ways that you can go. I mean, rather than, thinking of destroying the world, that you can try out your chances in this system.
Could it also be that because of the open economy and things becoming almost naturalized?
Yeah. And also there were opportunities even in English, right? Now actually, so now, so you have a lot of opportunities for you to, and after 1990s, so there's a growing, expanding private sector, and also there are a lot of opportunities outside the country, right? Even Middle East, you know, 80s, it was mainly housemaids, but now actually there were more jobs, you know, for males, and, you know, the outside housemaids, and the global, you know, labor relations.
Okay, so what you're
change.
saying is, though the context of the English language problem not changing very much, the social context has made it possible to channel the frustration in other areas.
Yeah. So it's a structure, particularly the attraction for armed struggle were gone. So that is that's one of the major reasons. But, you know, the problem of, well, I think, you know, now actually, so now the English, the link between youth unrest or discontent and English, the relationship has changed now. I don't think that anymore. It's a big issue. Big issue in the, of course, it's a big issue, but, you know, I think
not in the sense of rebellion or insurrection. No,
and actually, So I mean, it's not now actually even now you hardly hear the word kaduwa. No? So there was a time this kaduwa is a very, you know, a key word when you are talking about English. I don't think that the present generation, I don't know, maybe you may
they know it as a concept, sir. And
but I don't think that, you know, but in our generation, we used to use the term kaduwa.
Right. But there are other words that have come in, like, you know, posh and whatnot, like dislike. Right. So maybe not the term. Let me, because we have come close to about 2 hours here. So what is your personal journey like? Did you encounter the same frustrations that maybe the youth from, as you say, the lower strata had? Or if so, now you're talking to me in English and in a very fluently, and you write in English. So what was your journey like, and were you intimately connected with what you're doing?
Well, I didn't have a very, you know, I mean English speaking background at all. And also my education journey also, I mean, it's a, I mean, it's quite complicated. You know, I have never been a very bright student at schools. I failed scholarship exams. I didn't do well, you know. I have been to many schools. I have been to 5 schools. At one school, I mean, I would say I did fairly well. from grade 6 to grade 9. But apart from that, I didn't do well. I passed O-level. I failed English for O-levels. And also, I think, that I managed to pass mathematics so that I could do advanced level. And even in universities, I didn't do well. I wanted to do sociology special degree, but I didn't have enough marks. And then I wanted to do Sinhala special degree. Even there, I couldn't do well. Even one of the courses that I attended, very, I had a very fond memories is Professor J.B. Dissanayaka's lecture on language, but my result was not good. And then I had to go to history because I had 2 B passes. Well, that's a different story, but my English was so poor.
A very funny thing you said in the Sinhala one was, in history, they were just taking people out of the road.
Yes, because, there were no the students to follow a special degray in history, because there were some, stories that the head of the department was, stay in the road, and, when the student crossed from the other side, the New Art Theatre side, they grab, few students and take to the department and force them to do special degree.
I hope you see the irony of a university professor saying how he has failed quite successfully right throughout. But...
No, actually, no, well, so then the English one, and actually why I was sort of, I grew the interest in, I developed the enthusiasm to learn English is because of my political engagement, right? So I remember the first time that I tried to read a serious text in English, is that I had the opportunity to join in the study group that SSA, Social Scientist Association, ran under the leadership of Newton Gunasinghe before, just before he died.
How did you come across that, sir? It's not a normal thing that you just walk through.
Yeah, well, there are 2. So I knew Professor Jayadev Yanguda. He was my teacher.
Who was in campus, yes.
Yeah, and also I knew the Newton Gunasinghe also, and also we had a lot of friends. Those days we had this student organization called Independent Student Union, where, and actually we had a network with unlike the JVP, we work with the Old Left and other organizations like this various women's group and other parallel left-wing organization, and these institutions like the Movement for Interracial Justice and Equality, which was known as Merge, right? And so there were this various journals called Mawata, Sangwad, Vivarana, and this kind of it's a kind of new. There's a kind of that's you mentioned in the morning that the 2 volumes that I edited about this new
because I introduced this as being a very, very important, significant contribution to the documentation. Because
these texts were produced by a group of intellectuals whom I had connections with. Our student organization had very close connections with those people. So therefore, through those networks, so I became a frequent visitor to the Social Scientist Association. Okay. So there was a young group also. For example, Tisarani Gunasekara, C.A. Chandrapema, Ajit Serasundara, the Prageet Teknaligoda who disappeared, right? And also there was a younger group who worked with this older generation. And so I was the youngest member. And so this culture study group was discussing about 1956 transformation those days. So then while I was, I mean, in Peta somewhere, I at a, roadside, the bookseller, I noticed the small booklet by, I think, the Dennis Peris, this Daily News editor, written in English about 1956. It was, I think it was 10 rupees or something like that. I picked it up, I purchased it. I had, of course, we had those days the Malalasekara dictionary. That's one of the, assets that we have. So by using this, I was trying to read it. So that's the first time that, right? Also, I had a good friend. He was from Akuras area. He was a student of Javardhanapura University Management Faculty. He is very fluent in English. His name was Tripati Kumar, right, he's still there. He's very fluent in English. So I was so surprised, how does he know English? And also I remember when I was a first year student, I always saw, when we go to the library, I noticed that, this famous, well-known economist, Dr. What's his name?
Harshat Rupana.
Harshat Rupana. Harshat Rupana is
the World Bank now, I think.
He's now World Bank, economist. And so he is coming to the library and taking, borrowing large English, big English books. And so I was telling my friend, when we will be able to, read these books in English, and right.
So he was kind of a fantasy, so that.
Yeah, we had that dream. But university, I was in the grade 17. You had in first year. So you had 18 English classes, the rank according to the marks that you get at the entrance exam. So I was in the grade 17, right? So that's
which is why I always, even as a head, I took away the leveling and I said mix them, because once a student knows where he is, that really doesn't help. Because if, say, it's a mixed group, sir, and you're with the A's, you never know how weak you are. You're trying to converse as if you're among the A's. That always helps. Anyway, that's a different point, methodological point.
Actually, I had a lot of friends. For example, this Tisarani Gunasekara, the well-known journalist. She was one of my, I think still I remember, she was as one of my main, the political gurus at that time. So he's, of course, his English is, this is English speaking. And so therefore, we knew that we need to learn English. But at the time, it was so difficult. We didn't have one of the problems I had, I didn't have the basic qualification to learn English. So it was so difficult to read. So I kept a monitor exercise book like this. I think I still have it, right? I used to write, the difficult words. So that was how I learned to English, difficult words. And, so then I read it and, remember it, these difficult words. And then, then after the graduation, I was recruited as an assistant lecturer. I was given
Tell me, sir, how from somebody who was failing quite successfully, how were you able to get such good grades to be taken in as a lecturer? What happened?
That was a good question. My result was terrible, in first year and second year, right? I had no chance of getting even a second class lower division, right? I had only 2 C passes for the second, the part 1 of the special degree program. And then fortunately for me, I would emphasize, fortunately for me, universities were closed for 3 years, right? And then even I was thinking of, sending a medical, certificate for exam, to postpone the exam. And so then, during this period, my exposure to the outside world enhanced significantly, right? I had the opportunity to work with various intellectuals. I came to know, I worked closely with, the people like Jayadev Yangoda, Newton Gunasinghe, Charlia Besekara, Sunila Besekara, and these all kind of, social organizations. And, I became very organic part of these circles, right? And
these
then,
circles, the medium that you conversed was mainly Sinhala, English?
In Sinhala, mostly in Sinhala, right? And then when universities were reopened in 1990, I had the funny experience of following lectures in English medium, right? And we had to follow 3 English medium lecture courses because the lecturers were not able to do it in Sinhala, because one is this Professor Nira Vikramasinghe, who just came from Oxford, after finishing her PhD. He was only 1 year older than me, but he has completed the PhD, and she grew up in France, and he didn't even know a single word, but still we have to listen to her lectures, right? And also there's a Professor Bastian Pille, senior professor there. So he also taught in English, right? And so that also gives some exposure to, we were forced to listen to these people, these 2 individuals whose English was brilliant, right? And also Nira Vikramasinghe would give me books to read, and, even outside the class. So she tried to converse with us. So that somehow we have to, talk to them, right? So that is also, change the atmosphere, right? And then I sat for the exam.
Because you were not learning English, but you were engaging with work, which naturally made
because although my English was not good, I knew a lot of them, through exposure to this outside world, right? So I have sort of, become much more knowledgeable than,
that's one of the best ways to learn, sir, as an English
So that's
teacher.
how I could got better results in the 3rd year, where I got 3 A's and 3 B's, right?
I just, as an English teacher, I want to jump in and say that is probably the best way. You're not consciously learning English, you're doing something else in English. And thereby you learn the language, and you're not even self-conscious.
Yes. And then, and also then 4th year also I got a better results, and as a result of which I got a 2nd class upper division, and I was recruited. And then, interestingly, I was given a course to be taught immediately after I was recruited, world history course. The challenging part is that, there was no reading material whatsoever in Sinhala, right? I'll tell you, one of the topics that I had to teach was that American Civil War. Initially, I thought I even didn't know what American Civil War was. I thought that it was Independence War in 1776, right? Then I went to the library, and I found the Sinhala translation of Jawaharlal Nehru's Glimpse of World History, right? And I saw one chapter on American Civil War. Then I was reading, I realized that, that was not actually Independence War, that's a different thing, right? So then I got hold of several volumes of Oxford World History, right? Massive volumes in, English, right? What I did was that I went to my boarding house in Piliyandala. I would prepare notes for the, next morning lecture till, midnight, maybe 12, 1, 2, right? With the help of the Malalasekara dictionary, right? And at the same time, I got hold of two books about English grammar by Reverend Balangoda Ananda Maitreya Thero, right? It's called Sarala English Shikshakaya.
I'm actually hearing for the first time that he was also English grammarian.
So, and so the second, I don't remember the title of the second one, that's Usas English Shikshakaya or something like that. So these two works are extremely, he's a master in, the teaching language, English grammar and literature. So all the examples from classical English literature, from, Shakespeare and, everything, right? And from classics, right? So that's how I began to learn grammar, right? And various, the grammatical structures and so on, right? And so this, I had to do this. And at the same time, by accident, I was able to stay at a place of friend of mine, a friend who you know very well, this famous poet, Krishanta Sri Bhagyadatta.
I don't know him, sir. I know who he is.
Okay, you know by name, right?
Yes.
So, my wife at that time, my girlfriend, so she was staying there, and I visit there. So later on, after we married, so we stayed there, right? In 92. And so their mother, she was the only one who was there. She's an English teacher and burger woman. She mainly speak in English, right? So that's how I began to, speak in English, right? And then I had the opportunity in 1994 to go to Sweden. Actually, I was forced to go there by two individuals, Professor Jayadev Yangoda and Dr. Sunil Dastian, who had attended that program in previous years. And so I was asked to apply. I was reluctant. I realized that, I cannot do this in English because, you have to do some writing assignments and, make presentations. How do you do that? I was not confident at all. I can do such a thing in English, but they forced me to do that. I applied and I was selected and I went there and I managed, right? So that's a major, turning point. I met a lot of well-known scholars. I met Professor Johann Galtung, Peter Wallenstein, Barry Busan, and we were able to listen to their lectures and speak to them and so on. And I made some presentation and also since I had some strong political ideas and so on, in my limited English, I could converse with them, right? I think that made a lot of that changed a lot in my approach.
I think almost everybody I spoke with in the Kathikawa program, sir, referred to the fact that actually having the chance to go out and be immersed in an English-speaking. But I was just thinking, where you went, was it a mainly English-speaking country, sir?
No, it's a Sweden.
Exactly.
But the entire group is English speaking,
right?
And even luckily for me, the person other Sri Lankan who went there, also the Muslim professor is a professor from Veradeniya. He also English speaking. He's not speaking Sinhala. So otherwise I would have speaking Sinhala with him now.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I think that's a privilege.
Absolutely. Right?
Yeah. So so you have to be. I have to be there for 6 weeks. It's a 6-week program. Entire 6 weeks, you have to work in English. No other choice, right? So you have to write, you have to make presentations, right? I mean, sometimes you have to, take part in discussions, you have to ask questions and, right? So when you go to social events, in dinner parties and all, that you have to, be part of these social networks and, right? Well, so that's a challenge.
Because
Right?
I have also read your works in English, and it's almost difficult to believe that you actually struggled to learn and you were working with dictionaries, and that you took that route to get there. Because for
No,
me,
yeah, yeah. No,
your
then
writing,
then actually, so then you have to teach. You have to teach. No, you have to read. You have to prepare. For lectures, and even though you teach in Sinhala, so you have to. I mean, I read very slowly, but you have to do that. And so then I again went to India, for Hyderabad, to attend a program, 4-week program on American culture and civilization. So there was an institute there. There you have to write a academic paper in English. Of course, you have to write in English, no? So I wrote about the American party system. So I think it went very well. So I mean, that's the moment that I realized that I could write in English. Right? I could write some serious stuff in English.
because you actually
Right.
did it, and when you have to do it, you realize you can do it.
Yes. So then I actually, I had registered for my master's degree, which I completed in 2000. First, I was thinking of writing in English. In Sinhala. But later on, actually, it was Professor Youngwood who forced me to write in English. So I also thought that, the write in English. I managed to finish it in English. And also, I mean, it's came very well, and the examiners recommended it to be published also, but still I couldn't do that. So then, then 2000, end of 2000, early 2001, 2, I went to Netherlands to do my PhD. So at that time, I mean, as far as writing are concerned, it's
You all right then. So
yeah.
just before we finish, what is the situation with your own students now? Do they have the same dedication to learn English? Are they worried, or do they make the effort to learn?
It
Or do
depends.
they already know?
It depends. It depends on. Well, I know a lot of students. I personally experience a lot of students who have developed, who have improved, I mean, massively. And I think so if, for example, if you take the challenge, right? I don't want to name everyone, but there are names that I can. I mean, there are some students whom I have observed within the span of 1 or 2 years, so they have massively improved. Right.
Do you know how they have done that, sir? Were they reading a
No,
lot?
because now it is easier now. Now actually, so even I think that you have a lot of simple material to read in English, and so you're even, I mean, you have to work in English even from your some simple daily activities. For example, when you are using mobile phone, right? So you become familiar with the English language, right? So nowadays people watch movies and all kind of things, and the opportunities that that you listen to English music, and right. Mine was different. I mean, I so I remember even my age, there were a lot of children, I mean, young people watching English movies and so on, but I was not in that group because, I had some kind of reluctance to in this, because, the fact that I couldn't understand them, I didn't become a big fan of English movies. So those days there were, even in television, the television arrived, right? I think that was not much helpful for me, right? But now it is different, I think. So now, I mean, with internet and everything, so the English is very much part of your life. It's a, so I think, you know, I mean, it's, I can compare with the experience that I had around after 1990, 94, right? So that English became a part of my life now. So now actually, I mean, from the beginning, English become, I think that it's dependent to
social
what
media
extent.
also helps, no, sir?
Huh?
The social media and the natural.
Yeah, social media and, you know, right?
Help.
Yeah. So if you have the commitment and the desire to improve, so you have opportunities. So I think it's not difficult.
The Malalasekara dictionary you carried around can now be carried on a phone. Easy as that.
Yes, of course.
It's still possible. So the reason I like the fact that people like you come and tell your story is that people who come here keep showing that despite the difficulties, it's possible, right? And the way you did it. So
of course, yeah. No, I mean, it's not, yeah. So I think, I mean, I think my, when it comes to language learning, I would consider myself as a very slow and poor learner, right? So actually, I know that, you know, I remember when I start learning Dutch, compared to some of my colleagues, right? So I was quite backward, right? I mean, my ability to speak in Dutch. So my grammar is okay. It's interesting. My grammar is okay, but even I find it difficult to speak some very simple ideas in Dutch, right? While some of my colleagues whose grammar is not very good, but they speak, right?
I would say the second one should be the ideal, and I keep saying that. I'm going to end with how I should have started by introducing you, but because of the Sinhala one, I didn't. So Professor Nirmal Ranjith Dewasiri, I was like, you know, these two books that I showed. One of the things that I have heard about the left movement here is very little documentation gets done, right? But at least you, like in the Sinhala one, you spoke about what you are doing at the moment. You're actually documenting the lives of the early leftists, because this is one area, and I think it was Piyal Karyavasam who pointed out that fact that, you know, there's not much written about leftism, the ideology, not much. There's a lot of talk, but very little theoretical documentation has been done. And I think this volume where you have collected the articles of a particular era, and that was the era that actually had youth insurrections. You said now the time for that has passed. We have gone beyond ever having that again. I hope you're right, sir, because wars also, we keep thinking we are passing that stage, and here we go again. So I hope you're right. And then, you know, you write quite a lot in Sinhala, and you revisit the concept of history quite a lot, which is what you did in the recent exhibition as well. And then you write in English. So I did not refer to any of your work because this conversation was mainly about a particular issue. You know, you understand that and how you learned. So one day I might re-invite you to, you know, discuss your writing and your discipline as such, maybe later. Today I will thank you, because these days I talk to people in the middle of the night, and you know, we are both exhausted, but we still come and talk because it's important that we leave a message out. And when it's on YouTube, so it's there. And generally on YouTube, if I may say so, I have observed your behavior. You joke, or half the time your FB post and your YouTube is like, I always think, you know, you just go and on purpose, you know, you rile up people. So I'm so glad you came here and you spoke seriously about, you know, this journey. And I learned a lot by, you know, thinking how English is connected to youth unrest, because I see frustration daily in my life when I go to teach. Maybe not anger, but desire, and then lack of chances to use it, because Sri Lankan situation is very complicated. We still laugh we still have those gatekeeping things going on. So within that context, to have someone like you who have whatever you might say about your own journey of learning, obviously it's successful. You're a professor, you have written so much, you're teaching so much, and you're paradigm changing your discipline. So I would consider you, somebody that we can really respect for the.
Yeah, actually, yeah, just to disturb you, I mean, I'm still not very confident when I'm speaking in English, especially when I'm ashamed of when I listen to some of the, the material that even you have in YouTube, where I speak in English.
No,
Right? But yeah, I know what you're saying, going to say, right? So I mean, that also, even this, the YouTube thing also helped me when I was listening to some of the stuffs that are available. So I think, I'm trying to, improve on, so
our cultural context and our behavior with regard to English is so deeply ingrained. I don't think anyone who learns it through difficulty is ever going to be that confident to say, I know this.
No, and also I have to emphasize that, we will never be able to use English as, I mean, how do you say?
Native
For
speaker.
example, if I compare myself with my daughter, right? So who grew up with, I mean, whose exposure to English, he studied English and so teach English and so on. I mean, when you look at the difference, so I think, I never will be able to reach her level because, yeah.
But sir, for me, like, I mean, the fact that you still do it without that confidence, for me, that is
no, I mean, no, I think the message that I want to get across is simply this. So that was not the reason for you to be discouraged, right? So the what I had earlier, for example, when I was seeing this Harsha Trupana reading massive books, and when I saw Tisarani Gunasekara is speaking in fluent English and so on, and particularly when C.A. Chandrapema and Tisarani Gunasekara is conversing the mostly in English, so I thought that I was never able to do that. I was never able to discuss in English with them, right? So I mean, so that's a kind of, I mean, you don't have to discourage. I mean, that's wrong. That's the thing, I mean, now I can converse with them in English. And
why we look for perfection as an ideal is also another question, sir, because would, I mean, I don't know, every speaker makes mistakes, but we are in Sri Lanka especially so quick to catch little mistakes in English, while we won't even hear the ones in Sinhala. So I'm glad that, every time someone comes and repeats the same Sinhala conversation in English, the very act of doing it, for me, is to show that, yes, here we are talking in public, opening. YouTube can be viewed by anybody. So the gesture itself, so the act itself is one that should inspire others as well. So let me thank you. So every day we talk too long. Now I'm not even trying to stop because it's 2.5 hours. I'm just saying because we may not realize it. But this is because I just let the conversation flow, because having it out there for somebody to listen, that's all we can do. Whether 10 people listen or 100, does not matter. It's out there. Now it's up to us was putting it out there. Up to anyone who wants to learn is not our business. So thank you, Nirmal sir, very much. I might meet you again when I discuss, your work. Today, I didn't deal with your work at all. So thank you for telling us your story. Thank you for speaking about your vulnerabilities and your nervousness and unsureness, because that is what should inspire learners, that you have it, but you still speak. So That's
Thank you, Madhu. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed.
Thank you very much. So I learned a lot as well. Okay, then good night, sir. Sorry.